come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is your host, Siddhartha Vaidyanathan, and I'm glad to, be back after a bit of a break. We haven't done a podcast after the India-Australia series. It's been, we thought we'll take a bit of a break, but we also had a few other things come up. Some illnesses and some other, some work-related issues and so forth. Anyway, good to be back and hoping to be, far more regular going forward. I'm also delighted to have a guest who has been on the show before, and I would like to think an 81 All Out, one of the 81 All Out regular guests, DP Prashant from Chennai, a cricket fan, a very good cricket writer, and a very astute and observant fan of the game. Hi, Prashant. Great to have you back.
Hi, Sidvi. Lovely to be here.
Lovely. So, yeah, it's just Prashant and myself today. And one of the things I thought, we should explore on 81 All Out, and this has been something that I've been thinking about for a while, is to, look into YouTube videos, specifically, YouTube videos which are, lengthy enough to show a passage of play or an entire session, or even like, a lengthy video of a full day's play, and to review what, to review the particular game back in, from the past, and also to look for things that we would likely have missed the first time round. Because when you're watching a game live, it's very easy to get caught up in the moment. It's natural to, get caught up in the emotion of the moment. There's so much of excitement. You're also, anticipating things, you're hoping for things to happen. You're dreading that some things may happen. So there's a lot going on in your head when you're actually watching the game live. But I think over time, when you go back to a video, a pretty, lengthy video where you can watch in a more relaxed way, where you already know the result, then I think you tend to pick up things that you might have missed the first time around, especially, observing, something about the bowler or batter or something about the game that you probably didn't see. And I often feel that even writers and reporters should do this more often, because when they actually write the match report, they are writing about so much but they're also missing so much. So it would be interesting for a writer to go back to, say, a game from 98 or 99, watch it in its entirety, and then write a report and then compare it to what was actually written when it happened. Do you agree, Prashant?
Of course. I think recency bias is a big problem, because unfortunately, the way the human brain is wired is that so much of what you remember and so much of what you process is warped by what has happened immediately. And so when you're actually watching a game live, you are influenced by what the commentator is saying. You're influenced by the match situation, especially if you're invested in the result. If you're following, say, India or whatever, if you're invested in the result, you're not really thinking objectively about what's actually happening here. And when you come back and watch it again, you start noticing all kinds of little things. So, like, for example, when Tendulkar played that knock against Pakistan in Centurion, it is only when I went back and saw the footage later that I noticed that he had this front and across trigger movement, which I never noticed at the time, because it's an India-Pakistan match and I'm 20 years old and I'm cheering and I'm screaming, So it is great to go back and look at footage and look at what people are trying to do and why they're trying to do it. It's interesting to reconstruct it, at least in our minds. It may be flawed. We may not get it right all the time. We may think that they're doing certain things for a certain reason. But it's always fun to go back and reconstruct it and put ourselves in their shoes.
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, one of the things that Cricinfo did was they went back to games and to do live ball-by-ball commentary of the games. So they took like the 1992 World Cup final or the 1999 World Cup semi-final between Australia and South Africa, and they actually watched it and in its entirety, and they did ball by ball commentary because Cricinfo didn't do lengthy ball by ball commentary back for those games. So that was interesting. But I wish they had also gone the extra step, and they had also written written out reports and features as if the game was going on, like how they would have if they were to revisit it. And it would have been interesting to compare like a match report on the 1992 final written today compared to how it was written in 92.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a sea change. There's a sea change in the way the game is covered itself. No? I mean, it's
and
so
the way
different.
the game is seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even the very basic fact, like I think even the first paragraph would be totally different compared to how it was back then. I think so. For this particular episode, I think we had an interesting chat actually on WhatsApp, and we thought that it'll be good to do a episode on this. So there's been something you've been thinking about, Prashant, about cricket. What is it, and how did it come about?
No, so the idea came from that book that you very kindly gave me by Jack Fingleton about the Bodyline series, right? And it was really interesting to read about it because what England was trying to do was to use the batsman's anatomy against the batsman, right? To lock the batsman up by targeting his body as opposed to the stumps. Now, this is counterintuitive for many reasons because data shows us, and it makes common sense, that balls which are bowled at the stumps have the best chance of getting wickets. I mean, this has been borne out by any amount of data analysis, and it makes common sense also because you could get someone clean bowled, you could get someone LBW, as well as get them caught or whatever. But what England chose to do there was to forget about those sorts of dismissals and use the field and the player's anatomy. So they were locking up players by cramping them up and targeting their body. So Fingleton's book actually spoke about, touched a little bit about how the Australian batsmen tried to come up with different solutions to tackle this problem. So you had people like McCabe and Bradman who were trying to use unorthodox footwork to get into different positions than they would have if the bowling was conventional. So they were kind of trying to get inside the line, trying to get outside the line, basically trying to get their body out of the way so that they could actually free their arms and play their shots. So this actually got me thinking in terms of, modern versions of Bodyline. I mean, it's obviously not the same because you're not allowed to have those kind of fields anymore, but more modern kind of versions where fast bowlers are essentially cramping up the batsman, locking them up using their own anatomy. And the first example that came to mind was what Wahab Riaz did with Shane Watson in the World Cup quarterfinal in 2015, right? So, we remember that. When I watched it live, I wasn't thinking so cerebrally about it, because it was absolute theater, absolute drama. You had Wahab was blowing him kisses and he was taunting him and he was sledging him. Clapping, slow clapping him. It was brilliant to watch then. But actually, if you think about it, when you look at the footage, there is a very clear plan that he's following, which is that he's cramping Watson, he's bowling short, he's bowling from over the wicket. And the thing with Wahab is that he's slightly open-chested at the point of release, right? So when he's bowling over the wicket and he's kind of banging the ball into the pitch, getting it to rise, and he's taking Shane Watson's bat swing out of the equation. Like he has no room to free his arms. So essentially, half of Watson's body is locking the other half. His left half of his body is getting locked. His footwork is a little rigid, and so he's basically just fending away at ball, ball after ball after ball after ball. He's got him completely locked up, right? And
I was watching that, and Watson didn't keep he took his eye off almost every ball. Like the pace was so Wahab was bowling at like the 140s.
Yeah,
easily
yeah.
there. Sometimes even hitting the late 140s, I think.
Yeah.
And Watson basically takes his eye off. I mean, the balls were perfectly targeted. I mean, that's the other important thing here.
Yep.
And most of them were going past his nose.
Yep.
And Watson basically takes his eye off. And there's even a point in the commentary when Wasim Akram says, great bowling, but not so great batting.
Yeah.
Because he observes how Watson is taking his eye off everything. Like he's not watching the ball till he should be. Yeah.
No. In fact, he gets into such bad positions, and this is absolute commentary gold, that even Saurav Ganguly is talking about what terrible positions he's getting into while playing the short ball. Absolute Kali Yuga is happening. Okay, so even Saurav Ganguly is talking about the fact that he needs to be a little bit more proactive with his footwork, needs to get into better positions. So Wahab has got him completely locked up. Like his arms are not moving. And we have to remember that there was another batsman at the crease at the time, and it was Steve Smith. And Steve Smith didn't have as much. I mean, obviously a bowler is, in rhythm and he's bowling that fast. It's never easy. But Steve Smith never got stuck the way Watson did. And that was to do with the fact that his footwork was more unorthodox, more proactive. He was willing to move around a lot more and a lot earlier. So he was getting into positions where, he could get off strike or, get inside the line of the ball, turn it around off his hip, things like that, which Watson was not able to do. And then
interesting that you say Steve Smith, because it wasn't a pacer, but it was actually a spinner in Ashwin who cramped him later in his career.
Right.
This was the 2021 series.
Yeah. That, I mean, 2015, I think Smith was kind of just ascending into his first peak. We were just beginning to see what a special player he was. And he was he would take a single and come off, to the non-strikers end, and then the drama would unfold. This guy would completely cramp up Watson, lock him up, and then he delivers the perfect. I mean, it was obviously planned. It's a strategy that Misbah and he had worked out. He had a man for the hook, and then he bowls him a bouncer over his right shoulder, or even maybe outside his right shoulder. So he really has to fetch it. He has to take a risk. He has to fetch it from outside or over his right shoulder. And that's always risky, Ideally, when you're playing the hook, you want it to be over your left shoulder or maybe even between your shoulders. But you do not want to be fetching it from over your right shoulder because, your chances of success are less. But
because it hits later on the back.
Correct. Yeah. And you're less in control of it. I mean, you're basically flailing at the ball. And that's exactly what happens. It takes the top edge. It goes down that guy's throat like it is a sitter. Like he could have caught it with his mouth and he drops it. Your heart breaks. Every time you watch it, your heart breaks. He's done everything. He's got the field for it. He's got the man for it. And that game could have gone a very different direction, if that wicket had fallen there. But as it stands...
Yeah, they were 3 down for 60, 70 something, I think. Yeah. And chasing 213. Correct. Yeah, easily that game could have gone. And that moment, that sort of passage, right? It was almost like it was building up so beautifully.
Yeah.
And it was like one of these musical passages, which is like going so well. The flow is so beautiful and it's reaching the crescendo. And then it reaches the crescendo and then the musician just stops singing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Someone pulls out the mic plug or whatever.
Yeah. Or he just closes, or the musician just closes their mouth. And that's it. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I think that guy, his name was Rahat Ali.
Yeah.
And at some level, I felt really bad for him because we all know how it is to drop a catch. But I felt even more bad because of the passage that had gone before and then he dropped that catch.
Yeah. No, I feel bad for him that you are remembering this after 10 years with full name and...
Yeah, it's probably the only thing I remember him for. I don't remember him for anything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
oh, man. Yeah, that was sort of the... Yeah, but I think he also gets him once more. Like, it's not just that.
I think there's like an inside edge, lucky inside edge that goes past the stumps. He's in an absolute tangle. And funnily, this is not the first time this has happened to Watson. There's a very similar passage of play with Mohammad Amir in 2010, where he's bowling who's also a left armer, who's bowling the exact angle, the exact lengths that Wahab was bowling. This was in 2010. Again, it was an ODI in Australia. And this was just a few months before everything went sour for Amir. So one of the last few games of Amir with original factory settings. The comeback doesn't count. And he gets him into the same sort of tangle. And you can see that it's the same problem with the mechanics of Watson's footwork that the bowler is kind of exploiting. So maybe that may have actually had a bearing on the think tank in Pakistan figuring out that this is the way to bowl to Watson. This is the way to target him. If you've got the pace, and clearly both Wahab and Ahmed did. But honestly, as preparation for this episode, I went back and saw it. But Sidvi, it is so difficult to watch a clip of Amir and not feel sad. It's so hard.
Yeah.
It is so hard to go back then. And both of them, Asif and Amir, you had a right armer with all the wiles of Wasim Akram. And then you had a left armer with Waqar Space. It was just so perfect. And then it all went sour. So it was very difficult for me to go back and watch that footage. But it was, again, a very searing examination of Shane Watson's technique.
I saw it too, and that dismissal is really funny. I mean, it hits the top of the bat handle.
Yeah.
And then just pops up.
Yeah. It shows you how late he was, right? It shows you how late the batter is. Like, if the bat handle is meeting the ball, that means the bat is so far behind. It means that you're that late. That's how quick.
Yeah. In fact, had he been a worse batter, he would have completely missed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So in a way, it's good. He was an actual batter and not a tail-ender. The tail-ender would have just got hit.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, a lot of Pakistani bowlers, both of them had such whippy actions, right? So if you're not really sharp and if you don't pick the cue, you could end up being as late as Watson was on both occasions.
Yeah. I mean, and both Wahab and Amir, we must. I'll link the videos, of course, and I would urge the listeners to watch it. But both of them were left armers bowling over the wicket to the right hander. So that's the angle we're talking about. That is, and if actually intuitively it doesn't look like an angle where you can cramp the batter, because you always think of the left armer moving it away from the bat. But if you're good enough and fast enough, you can do it.
Yeah, I think it's also about where you are on the crease when you're delivering the ball and, what your objective is. And in this case, both of them were doing pretty much the same thing. They were spearing it into tucking up the batsman completely.
Yeah, and I think around that phase, you had, Amir was 2010, Wahab was 2015. And then in between that, you had another very similar example with Mitchell Johnson, which was Mitchell Johnson's peak when he came in and just destroyed England in that 2013 series.
Yeah. If you go back and look at the wickets that he took at the Gabba, which is the first test, right? You will find that he's basically bowling that angle to everyone. Okay, so the wickets are falling when he's going over the wicket to the right-hander. And when it's a left-hander, he actually goes around the wicket. He goes around the wicket to the left-hander so that he can bowl a similar kind of angle and, target their ribs and target their, cramp them up that way.
Michael Carberry, right? The left-hander.
Michael Carberry, the opening batter, and Cook also. I think he gets Cook also from that angle. The one to Trot actually was interesting, and given the fact that Trot kind of quit after the Gabba test, not mistaken.
Yeah.
Trot actually tried to do something quite proactive. I mean, if you look at what he was trying to do, he was actually trying to get inside the line. He gets a tickle down the leg side, which is unfortunate. But essentially, he was trying to come up with something to counter the angle that Johnson was bowling. So I actually felt bad.
but that thing I think was also planned. So that you say was unfortunate, but when you see the wicket, it seems like very clearly a plan that they've come up with to get him strangled down the leg.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But I'm saying that there were so many other batters in that side who got into far worse positions or weren't even trying anything different. At least Trot was trying to counter it with his feet. And, he's an excellent batsman. It would have been really interesting if he had stayed on and figured out a way of countering Mitchell Johnson for the rest of that series. Sadly, wasn't to be.
In fact, in the second innings, both Trot and Peterson, they get out to pretty much the way Watson could have got out to in that that Adelaide game, Adelaide quarterfinal. I mean, that same hook over the right shoulder, fielder set exactly for that, and it goes down his throat.
So it's, I mean, again, we are not thinking so cerebrally when these things are happening at that time. At that time, we're just excited by the pace. We're excited by the sledging. We're excited by, the fever of, a fast bowler who's in rhythm. But there is so much that goes behind it and so much of accuracy, because if you get it wrong, bowling that angle, you can go for a lot of runs because it's so easy for a batsman to just tap you away if you're even slightly off. So there is it's not like anyone can do this. You have to be bowling well and you have to be extraordinarily accurate. It's not like, where conditions are helpful for a swing bowler. He just runs up and lands it on a length and it, wobbles all over the place. It's not that at all. On this particular line, if you get it even slightly wrong at that pace, you can go for many, many runs and the batsman will get off to an absolute flyer.
No, and the other thing is that when I was, early on, I used to often wonder, it's a test match. Why can't these guys just leave every single short ball that they face? And, Steve Waugh probably spoiled me in this way because Steve Waugh got into this phase where he just kept leaving everything.
Or
but then
hit.
You realize, or getting hit, exactly. And then you realize that, at this pace, with a well-directed ball, if you get hit, you're in like deep trouble. I mean, I think it was Mohinder Amarnath mentioned this once, and then it finally clicked in my head. He's like, when he was facing the West Indies quicks, he used to be really praised for his hook shot. So everyone felt Amarnath had a great hook shot. Right. But in his book, he clearly writes, and I think it's like an amazing sort of passage of honesty there, where he says, I actually hooked because I was scared. Because if I didn't hook, I was dead. I mean, that's the only thing. I mean, he said, it was purely a matter of self-preservation for me.
Yeah.
And, and I think many of these guys, they play these shots because otherwise they're going to hit.
Yeah. And honestly, if you're in the wrong position and a ball is coming at your face, your reaction is not a planned reaction. Your reaction is very often purely instinctive. It is self-preservation. If you're in a good position or if you get into the right position, it's much easier for you to execute your trained reaction or your practiced reaction, which may be to play a hook shot or to, sway out of the way or whatever it is. But if you're in a wrong position, and more importantly, if you haven't picked the ball out of the bowler's hand, like Watson did with Amir, if you're late on the ball, your reaction will almost always be instinctive. So think of Tendulkar fending off Olonga, right? I mean, it's not like Tendulkar can't play the short ball. It's not like Tendulkar hasn't played the hook shot. It's not like he hasn't hooked faster bowlers than Olonga. But that particular ball, he didn't pick early enough. And because he didn't pick the bouncer early enough, he reacted instinctively, which was to fend the ball off his face. So,
Yeah, interesting. Tendulkar is an interesting example, actually, because later in his career, when he faces Dale Steyn, of course, from a different angle, but still, Steyn is still targeting his body, and then he chooses to get hit. He takes the hits.
Yeah. There's that amazing passage where Dale Steyn and Moni Mokel are bowling to Gambhir and Tendulkar.
In Cape Town, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That 2010-11.
That the Cape Town was the famous passage, but I'm wondering if you're talking about the other one. Yeah.
No, it was that one where, Tendulkar ended up facing almost all of Steyn and Mokel ended up bowling almost exclusively to Gambhir. And he does a lot of this, what you're talking about. But yeah, that's a different angle, different bowler.
Yeah, because by then, I think, he realized that he was not going to be able to pull and hook the way he could when he was younger.
Right.
It was like an admission of his slowing reflexes because it was 2010 and by then he was almost like getting done.
Right.
And he said, okay, I need to hang around, so I'll just take the hits.
But while that is true, no, the same Tendulkar, if you remember, actually my favorite innings from the 2011 World Cup was actually the quarterfinal game against Australia. Where
I've forgotten that inning. I've forgotten his innings.
Yeah. No, so it's like a blazing half century against serious pace. I think Australia had Lee and they had Sean Tate and I think may have had Mitchell Johnson also. I'm not sure, but they had Lee and Sean Tate, and I think he brings out the hook a couple of times there. Brings out the hook against England also in Bangalore. So
they had Mitchell Johnson. So I'm looking at the scorecard. They had Lee, Tate, and Johnson. Yeah.
So that game for me was such a high voltage game, right? Because you had three of the fastest bowlers that Australia has ever produced, and they're playing in the same team. And here's this guy who's like 40 years old, and he's waving his bat around like a toothpick. It is really special knock. I think he plays a couple of hooks over there, if I'm not mistaken, hooks, pulls, or something. But yeah, you're right. It may just be that the Ahmedabad surface allowed him to do it. It was slower and therefore he felt he could do it. Cape Town may have been quicker and so he said the risk is not worth it. But yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And the thing is, that game, of course, I remember mostly the Yuvraj Raina partnership at the end. Again, you're so caught up in the fact that it's a World Cup quarterfinal, it's Australia. You tend to forget a lot of stuff that happens otherwise. You're more interested in like how to beat these guys. Because if you remember, until 2011, I think we did a rewind of this World Cup, right?
Yeah.
And India hadn't beaten Australia in a World Cup for, I think, since ever.
Yeah.
Since 92 they didn't win. So you had to go back to 87 to have an India beat Australia in a World Cup. So that was like
87 also they lost.
They lost by one run.
I think
they won the next game. They won the next game though.
Okay.
There were two games in 87.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you had to go back a long time. Basically, a whole generation of fans had never seen India beat Australia in a World Cup till 2011. So, that was that. There was the small matter of that.
Yeah.
So, that was, this was interesting. So, but in all this though.
But sorry, Siddhi, just to come back to that same point, right? Mitchell Johnson's actually a great example simply because, he blew hot and cold, right? So when he got it right, which was the 2013, 2014, when
2013 was actually his comeback. Yeah.
Correct. When he got it right, he was really scary. Right? But the same Mitchell Johnson, when he tried to bowl that particular line from over the wicket, short over the wicket, when his rhythm was off, if you remember, he would leak runs. He would be hemorrhaging runs. Right. And that's a great example of how tough it is to actually stick to your plan with that line. You have to be very, very accurate and skillful to execute it because you can't afford to reduce your pace and focus on accuracy because the success of that plan depends on a certain amount of pace, right? And at the same time, if you try for a little bit of try for a bit of extra pace and you sacrifice accuracy, you go for runs. So it's actually very, very tough to pull off.
I think Mitchell Johnson's sort of bad days have been immortalized in that Barmy Army song, right?
Yeah.
He bowls to the left, he bowls to the right, and then the umpire calls wide. Yeah, that whole song.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I think there's a bit that says Mitchell Johnson who gets in a state where he just can't bowl straight, and
yeah, yeah,
and that's a fact. I mean, he used to
yeah,
get into these. He had days where he couldn't, keep it. He couldn't get his line right, and then he just kept getting whacked.
yeah.
So yeah,
But on the days when it works, it looks spectacular. You almost asking yourself, why can't he just bowl like this all the time? It's impossible to. It's literally.
2013, 2014, I think Mitchell Johnson, anyone who saw him, I even the bowling, fast bowling riches we have,
Yeah,
that still seems to be, as good as
yeah,
that.
for sure.
We've seen Bumrah, Rabada, Cummins, Stark. They've seen so much in the last
Yep.
few years.
Yep.
But Mitchell Johnson was special,
Yeah.
man. I mean,
Yeah.
amazing bowling.
Yeah. I mean, proper, they say demon fast bowler, that's exactly what he was. And there is a physicality to what he was doing. It's, which is probably not there in many of the other bowlers that you're talking about. There was a physical threat that was always lurking. And it was a threat that he leveraged to the max in the first test, where he was constantly bowling this line, going across the batsman.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, an interesting point. Like how the bowling that we've seen in the last 5 years, like the amazing bowling, I should add, but all of them have been so like clinical in going for wickets. It's not they've not really needed this kind of tactic at all. In fact, I don't even remember if any of them tried to go after the body with this kind of relentless strategy. Because they seem to be able to get wickets anyway. Really, really okay. Maybe the conditions have helped them. Of course, it has been a bowling era, but more than that, I think they've been so good that they've not needed any of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, though all of them do change the angles a lot.
Yeah,
like you regularly see Rabada bowling around the wicket. You regularly see Bumrah trying that too against lefties.
Yeah, so there is this amazing spell of play. Again, you remember the drama and all of it. It's the fourth Test match between England and South Africa. It's at Trent Bridge
in '98.
In '98, and it's Allan Donald bowling at Atherton and Hussain, right? And the interesting thing
the Sky Sports podcast duo.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. And the backdrop to this is that Donald actually talks about this tour in his book, in his autobiography, which is very predictably called White Lightning. And the minute you have a book which is named that way, you can be almost sure that it's full of cliches. So there are a lot of cliches, and he trots out a lot of tropes. The only part that's exciting, that's interesting to read in that entire book is when he talks about this particular tour, this particular series. And he talks about how exhausted he was, in the fourth and in the fifth test, and how he said getting out of bed every day was an effort, and how he would be, in the bathtub, soothing his muscles. But you look back and you look at the stats, right? He was such a lion of a fast bowler. He is South Africa's strike bowler, and he's bowled the maximum number of overs, right? So he's been both. Basically, it's like Bumrah in this BGT, whatever it is, give the ball to Bumrah. I mean, that was basically what Cronje was doing.
Bumrah or bust.
Bumrah or bust, exactly. So by the time we're in the fourth test, he's exhausted, and he bowls his first spell from over the wicket when the ball is still new and doing a little bit. And then, the other ball, there's not much in the wicket. And once the new ball loses its shine, it's not doing much. So Atherton, and then Atherton, Butcher and Hussain, they all get off to starts. Butcher gets out. Atherton and Hussain are batting, and then he comes back for his next spell, right? Now, the way I remember this as a kid watching it was that here's this guy who's come back, with some crazed passion in his eyes and he's bowling, blindingly fast. But it's actually very well thought out because he realizes that there's not much in the wicket. The ball's not doing much. So the only way he can force a wicket is by using that angle, where he's, as a right arm bowler, bowling around the wicket and he's bowling into the body of the batsman. He's basically using the batsman's body to kind of get them into awkward positions. What was also interesting in this case is if you remember how Michael Atherton used to bat, he used to love going back and across. I mean, very simple back foot technique where you go back and across. When the right arm fast bowler is bowling bouncers at you from around the wicket, that bouncer is following you, right? So if you try and go back and across and then try and sway out of the way, you're basically tying yourself into a knot, which was happening with Atherton at the time. He fends off one, which the umpire disallows. It's very clearly off the glove. But, he's not really looking convincing at all. He's locked up in much the same way that Watson was locked up. He was completely locked up. And the same thing that happened with Watson happens with Atherton. So Donald gives him a bouncer, again, above and outside his right shoulder. And Atherton has to fetch it. But Atherton has been battered for so long that he grabs the opportunity and plays that kind of a Hail Mary hook shot, where it goes up in the air and just clears Paul Adams. Unfortunately, unlike Misbah, Hansi did not have the man there for the shot. So I think he got lucky. Atherton got lucky.
Or maybe he was hoping Atherton plays that shot and it gets a top edge, just straight up. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, so, all of this is happening and then, the end switch, and it's no different with Hussain. I mean, Hussain is also equally locked up and he goes for the kill with Hussain with one that is pitched up, after tying him up with short balls into his body and, a few short balls which are going across him. When he's convinced that Hussain is camping in his crease. He's well within his crease, expecting the short ball. He pitches one up, which Hussain pokes at, gets a nick, and then Boucher drops it. So,
Boucher drops a sitter.
Yeah, absolute sitter. And this is, early days Boucher. Everyone's comparing him with Richardson and stuff like that. So you feel a little sorry for him. And it's nice to see there are people who come up and pat him on the back and all that. But the damage is done. I think that's pretty much it as far as Donald in that test match. And I think England go on to chase down the score the next day. If you look at the score,
Atherton is not out. 98.
98. So if you look at the scorecard, it looks, fairly convincing and straightforward. They won by 8 wickets, whatever it was. But it was anything but that, during that passage of play. And again, there's a lot of sledging and theatrics and drama. But what it is a bowler very cleverly figuring out his best chance of getting a wicket and executing it absolutely ruthlessly with amazing efficiency. Just didn't have luck on that day.
I remember that watching that game actually. Back then, I used to really enjoy watching tests in England because it was perfect for India time zone, right? I mean, you just
miss school and come back.
Yeah. Or even if you don't miss school, if you after you finish school, you almost have the whole day's play to watch. So and I remember watching it, but interestingly, when I see it on YouTube now, I realize how in my head I thought that was a surface that was majorly helping fast bowling. And then I see it and the ball is almost dying on the keeper, and sometimes when Donald is not bowling quick, like the balls when he's actually just bowling normally, the surface is just dying. It's like a proper, like a batter-friendly, slow surface.
Yeah. And that's obvious, no? Like, you look at the same surface when Elworthy is bowling or when Pollock is bowling. They're not getting anything out of it. So it actually takes like a huge effort to generate the kind of heat on that surface, which is very different from the surface that, Wahab was bowling on, or Mitchell Johnson was bowling on, or Mohammad Amir was bowling on, all of which were much faster surfaces. This was a slower, softer surface, and the ball wasn't doing anything much. So it was, Donald ended up with 33 wickets. Again, it's very similar to Bumrah's tally. Ended up with 33 wickets in the series. But this wicketless spell, I think, was for me the highlight of that series, simply because the odds were so stacked against him.
Yeah. Also, Donald, I think, a lot of South Africans mention how we missed the fastest of Donald.
Yeah.
Like even though we saw him through the 90s,
Yeah.
apparently in the 80s when South Africa couldn't play Test cricket, I believe he was like astonishingly fast.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of the domestic South Africans, when they talk about Donald in the 80s, they're like, dude, we were just shivering. We were just standing there at the crease.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and he was, by 98, actually, he was 32.
Yeah.
Which, and you would think that for a fast bowler, it's 10 years probably after his peak. I mean, his peak pace, not his peak skill, his peak pace. Yeah.
I mean, just imagine if you're a rebel cricketer going and playing in South Africa. No, everyone thinks that you're like this greedy guy willing to give up on principle.
Money.
Yeah. Okay, and then you basically spurn your home board. Everyone's criticizing you for everything. You land up in South Africa, and then you're facing this guy who's an absolute demon.
Yeah, you're like, why the hell did I make this choice?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, whoever went there in their late 80s probably felt that way.
Yeah, Mike Gatting.
Yeah. I think even maybe Gooch, right? Gooch went
in the early 80s.
It's amazing how all the English cricketers got totally it's forgotten.
Whitewashed. It's on these West Indies guys only. They stuck with it for the rest of their
West Indies guys, their whole life got ruined because of that.
Yeah.
And finally, there is another example that we wanted to talk about at a game where you were present, the famous '99 India-Pakistan Test, where of course that game. I think during that game it would have been very hard to even think straight. That was how manic that game was. And did you go for all 4 days?
No, but I didn't go for all 4 days. But I mean, I at this point I have to plug. Sidvi's not going to do it, so I'll do it. I have to plug. Sidvi's piece on this game. It is the best thing you will read on that particular test match. It's an amazing test match for so many reasons. But I think one of the things that probably doesn't get talked about enough or as much as it should be talked about was that
the cricket.
Is the surface in the surface on which that test match was played. There was something in it for everyone. It was if you were good at what you did, you would find something in that surface. And that is true of Saklen. That is obviously true of Tendulkar. That was true of Afridi. That was true of Venkatesh Prasad. And Anil Kumble also. So, it is not a turner or a seamer or anything like that. It was just a great cricket wicket where, if you were skilled at what you did, you would do well. We're obviously talking about Wasim Akram bowling to Dravid. I mean, that contest did not last very long because Wasim was that good. But essentially, what he's doing again is using Dravid's anatomy against Dravid. So he starts off bowling over the wicket.
But this time not with the short ball.
Not with the short ball. So he's bowling over the wicket to Dravid. Obviously, he notices there's a bit of reverse, and so he brings himself on. His first ball kind of bends back into Dravid and hits him on the pad, because in a DRS era, that would have been plumb. I mean, it was absolutely plumb. If you go back and look at it on YouTube, it is absolutely stone cold plumb. But, we were living in different times where, umpires would hesitate to give you out if you were on the front foot. So Dravid kind of escapes. But he knows, he would have known how close he was to...
No, it's also a little confusing with that one because you're not sure if it hit the bat first or the pad first. So I think the umpire probably had that doubt. Yeah. So that is fine because in the replay you see it actually hit the pad first and then it's plumb. Yeah.
Right. It's absolutely plumb. So Dravid is immediately now thinking that his left leg is in the way, right? So he's immediately now conscious that his left leg needs to be a little bit inside the line because Wasim is bending the ball back in, right? So he's maybe makes a small adjustment, maybe opens his left leg or maybe shifts his left leg maybe an inch or two in his stance. And then the next ball again is a similar line, and he manages to defend it nicely. It's this kind of defense that would have given him some confidence. So now he's thinking in his mind that it's going to bend back in. I need to keep my left leg out of the way. And then Wasim delivers the coup de grace, which is he starts one on middle and leg, and Dravid is now thinking, he's now completely opened up his body because he's thinking, okay, so if this one is on middle and leg, maybe I can turn it around my hip for a single. But then the ball goes the other way and just clips the off stump, right? It's art. It's not, it's when science reaches that level of perfection, it becomes art, because it's, he's done it in just 3 balls. And you can see how each of those balls actually maybe played a part in what Dravid did. Because if the first ball had not moved in, he may have shaped to play that ball differently. But I would argue that it's the exaggerated movement of the first ball that contributed to the way he reacted to that third ball. And it was, again, masterful bowling.
I also think it is a case of, a batter is not as good as Dravid might not have had the same sequence of deliveries. Because I think, Dravid is a kind of batter who made these micro adjustments through his innings because he was so good, and which helped him in so many ways. But I think because of that, it actually worked against him in this particular sequence.
Yeah. But I mean, what's amazing is that, it's a left-arm bowler bowling over the wicket, right? It's basically, on paper, it's the same thing. But because the conditions are different, and because the ball is reversing, and, it's not a pitch in Australia where it's going to bounce over the shoulder, Wasim is actually targeting the stumps. But what he's doing is that he's making you very conscious of your body and your body positions, and using that against you, even as he is targeting the stumps. His final killer blow is to actually hit your off bail. But I was at the ground when this happened. I didn't see any of this at the ground. Okay, so what I saw was Dravid getting beaten on a defensive shot, which was rare, because he had such a good defense. So you saw him getting beaten on a defensive shot, and the stumps are intact. The bail's gone for a toss, but the stumps are intact. So you know that it must have been a really special ball, because the Pakistanis were celebrating like crazy. And then went home and saw it, and you realize just how beautiful that ball was. But then you watch it again now, so many years later, and you watch the sequence of those 3-4 balls on YouTube, and you realize what a master Wasim was, and how lucky we were to watch him.
I think the mastery comes from, giving himself the chance. See, because once the ball pitches, Wasim doesn't really know what is going to happen. I mean, he probably knows which way it will go, but he's not calculating every single point of the ball's trajectory. But I think the mastery lies in being able to hit that right length and give the ball a chance to do that magic.
Yeah.
Which is what even Bumrah does. I mean, often, what happens to the ball, I feel, is like a pleasant surprise even for Bumrah. But he has got that pleasant surprise because he has given it a chance to do the extraordinary.
No, so while I agree with you, I'm saying that the ball which actually gets Dravid here, I don't think it is a coincidence that it starts on middle or middle and leg. I don't think so. I think that is what he intended it to do. I think he intended it to cut away from Dravid, I think.
But I don't think he intended it to kiss the top of off.
That and all.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. That okay, fine. That obviously there is a degree of fortune there, like an inch above, and
it would have missed. Yeah.
And it would have missed, and but that is obviously luck. But I don't think. I think the fact that he wanted one to leave Dravid was by design. But I totally get your point about the scramble seam, doing funny things. Basically, bowl it on a good area and let let randomness do
and
that.
let it and give it a chance to do magic.
Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, I remember Wasim, and now in fact I even see Bumrah. I think even most great bowlers are like that. I remember a lot of plays and misses of Wasim. I remember a lot of really close LBWs, a lot of really close, ball just missing the stump by a few inches, and all that is because he was giving. I mean, it was just. I mean, eventually what happens is that he's not in control, but he was giving it a chance to get himself into that zone. So and I feel even Bumrah is very much like that. Like in a spell, you can see at least like 5-6 balls that can give him a wicket, but don't.
Yeah. I mean, that first spell that he bowls to Ramesh and Lakshman, he could have had either of them out a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I've had either of them out a bunch of times. But anyway.
And that's the sort of the flip side of, that's the one good thing of, these extended YouTube highlights also is that not only do you see the wickets, you also see the could have been wickets or the line calls. That was not happening earlier. I mean, often when you see highlights, you just see the wickets or you just see the fours. But I think it's important to see even the misses to realize that,
Absolutely.
This is great bowling, and it just happens that, sometimes you get a wicket, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Like, in fact, that Wahab Riaz spell, I think in that one spell that he bowls, he doesn't get a wicket. I mean, he gets 2 wickets in the game.
Yeah.
But in that the most memorable spell, he doesn't get a wicket.
When he is quote unquote blowing hot, he's not actually he's not actually striking at that point in time.
Yeah.
He's not.
So so that is amazing. So I mean I think we've covered pretty much what we the sort of the spells and passages we wanted to discuss. Is there anything else that's coming to mind at the moment?
No, on this theme, no.
Now this theme, no. I mean, one thing we must mention is that the modern bowlers use angles a lot, and now it's almost taken for granted. In fact, I remember when Donald went round the wicket to Atherton, it was still a novelty for a right-arm fast bowler to go round the wicket. It wasn't common back then at all. I don't think many right-armers. I don't remember Srinath bowling round the wicket too much till later in his career.
No, he did it when he was bowling to Jayasurya. But that was more to kind of cramp Jayasurya.
But that was a lefty. I'm saying round the wicket to a righty was very rare.
No, very rare.
Yeah, but now you see it so often that you take it for granted. In fact, I think Rabada does it more often than most. I think now. But even others. So it's something to recognize. I mean, these sort of passages tell you that these are not things that are necessarily always been normal.
No.
So. Yeah, and going back to Bodyline also, there was a taboo actually for a while after Bodyline. I think it was Keith Miller who wrote about it. He said, whenever I used to go round the wicket and try to bounce the batter, it was almost like people used to give me like a, bad look. Like I was trying to do a
something
Bodyline.
Dirty.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of history to it, but it's also nice to sort of go back and look at it from a dispassionate view where you're not totally, see, for instance, the 99 match between India and Pakistan, you can look at that match completely and ignore all the cricket and still be totally excited by what happened in that match.
Of course.
So, because that was how much drama there was in that game.
Yeah, and such high quality cricket. I mean, such high quality cricket. Insane.
That's one of the great games. I mean, that's in fact probably the game. I mean, that's the kind of game that, it hooks you to cricket so much that it's hard to get out of that grip after that. That's how varied and beautiful that game was. In fact, that game, I mean, I'll link the piece that I wrote about it. That was more about the final day and the drama around it. Not so much the cricketing, like the pure cricketing part. More the crowd experience and everything else. But there was a bit where Nayan Mongia. I interviewed Nayan Mongia for that game, and he told me an interesting thing about how in the first inning Saklen was basically just they had no clue what he was doing. I mean, Saklen was like bowling the doosra and the off spinner. He was just taunting them.
Yeah.
And then there was this article that Mohinder Amarnath apparently wrote in India Today or one of the magazines, which these players read in the middle of a test, and where Mohinder Amarnath gave them a tip for how to face Saklen and said how, if he is going wide of the crease, then he's definitely bowling the off break. But if he's going closer to the stumps, then he's bowling the doosra. Because he's closer to the stumps, he's just trying to pitch the ball on the stumps and take it away. Right. But wider, he's trying to use that angle to bring it in.
Right.
And these guys, basically, Nayan Mongia says, we read that article, and then in the second innings, all I was looking at is where is Saklen bowling from? And then I was not so much looking at the ball as I was looking from his delivery point. So,
no, but one important question. Times of India doesn't go to Pakistan dressing room or what?
That is another. I didn't ask him about it. Yeah. But I mean, I'm saying, back then that was the data analysis.
Yeah. Correct.
They didn't have too much. Now you will have the data guy tell you exactly this in 2 minutes. Correct. Back then that's what they had to use for data.
Correct.
And a player like Mongia, I'm sure Tendulkar had other ways to counter that. Right. But a player like a batter like Mongia, probably it helps to have these sort of little thumb rules to go with.
No, of course, and clearly it worked, right? Because he got a 50 odd or something in the second innings before.
He did. I mean, everyone remembers how he got out.
Yeah.
But, he did bat well till then.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, he also told me he was running a fever. Remember, he was wearing a sweater.
Yeah, he was wearing a full sleeve sweater in Chennai.
Yeah, correct. So he said he was running a fever and, he was shivering and all that. So actually, after cursing him for all those years, I felt a bit bad. Okay, maybe he tried his best and he had to give it away. Yeah. So anyway, I think this was great, man. I think it was a good sort of angle to explore. Angle, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, to explore. And we should get do this as often as we can. And if there are, I think one of the things to do, what I've been doing is that there are a number of these 1980s West Indies games that actually have like 1 hour of the test and 1 hour of a day's play and all, like extensive visuals there. I think Darren Mordecai, I think that's his name, right? Mordecai. Yeah. He has a lot of these. And, when you watch those games, you realize that, the whole, this aura and the myth around this West Indies bowling.
So thank you for saying this. Thank you for saying this. Okay. There are periods of play when Michael Holding is phoning it in, man. He's bowling medium pace.
And even like a bowler as great as Marshall, perhaps, I totally agree. Absolute great. Nothing to compare. But even he had his bad days. I mean, even Marshall was like, he was bowling, down the leg side and getting clipped for 4 and all that.
And there is no speed gun, right? So there is no numerical evidence of it. But I don't blame them. Maybe they were playing on a really flat wicket, or maybe they were really exhausted from the amount of first-class cricket they were playing, or maybe they were nursing an injury. But it's not fair to expect them to bowl at 140 Ks just because in our minds they are these speed demons. I mean, there were days when they were phoning it in. Absolutely. Thank you for saying this. It seems heretical to say this, but there were days.
No, I mean, outside the West Indies, actually, there's not too much footage of games from the West Indies, unfortunately. But outside the West Indies, like there is this whole West Indies Pakistan series in the mid 1980s. I think they went twice. But there is this one series has extensive footage. And you watch those games, they're very flat pitches. Like there's absolutely nothing in the pitches. You're like, okay, obviously these guys are, going to try their best to limit the runs and not really give it. And if you see that, then you're like, actually, what I'm seeing now is not too different from that. I mean, they were great. They had great records and they were a great team. And perhaps, the difference between them and the next team was very vast. Not the next team, but the next few teams. Like West Indies, Pakistan were close in the 80s, but then the next team, which was possibly England, was way behind. Australia was completely weakened. India was still like one of those really mid-table teams. So you're like, okay. I mean, they were very good, but let's not. And it sort of demystifies it in a good way. I think it's good to have that.
And in contrast, you look at Michael Holding bowling that over to Jeffrey Boycott. I mean, that is seriously quick. Or
that is amazing. That is like I'm sure like 30 years later, if you take that Bumrah spell in Antigua. Or Kingston or Bumrah spell anywhere actually. So you will probably feel that way.
And I think that's where I think cricket has grown so much, right? In the sense that the range of pace at which your fast bowler bowls during a day, like how quick is your fast bowler in his first over versus how quick is your fast bowler in his 15th over. I think the fitness, sports, science, whatever you call it, I think there's a lot less phoning in at medium pace now, I think.
I mean, there's a lot less bowling wide of off stump to, just have the batter leave and leave and leave.
Correct.
Now, in fact, there's the batters also have this range of strokes that they never had before. So, you can't even if you try something restrictive, they're going to find a way to score runs. So, I think it's all it's good to demystify it in your head also.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so what I meant is that we should look for more such clips and also more such themes to talk about, because we often miss it. I mean, this is actually the job of commentary, that they are supposed to inform us of these things, but of course they also get caught up in the moment and the economics and the hype of things, which is natural, I'm guessing, to forget about it. So we should do that.
Whispering death is more whispering and less death today.
Today. All right. Thanks, man. And thank you for listening. And the usual, 81allout.com is our website. You can sort of tweet us at 81allout. Please leave a rating and a review on the podcast if you like it. That has helped people find us. And thank you for those who have left a rating and a review. Thank you also for those who regularly send us feedback and keep us on our toes. Sometimes you tell us things that we possibly don't expect and don't want to hear, but that's also totally fine, because I think it's important to listen to what everyone says and take it in a constructive way. So please keep writing in and let us know. You can also buy the books we have republished, War Minus the Shooting, Cricket Beyond the Bazaar, and The Summer Game. I'll link to all of them. And 3 great books, fantastic reads for any cricket lover. So please pick it up. And we'll join you in about 10 days' time for the next episode. Thanks, Prashant. And
Thanks.
Good night and take care.
Good night. Bye.